Welcome to Please Me, the award-winning sexuality podcast bringing you bold conversations and big clit energy. I'm thrilled to announce that Please Me is the #1 ranked sexuality podcast in the USA and worldwide. I'm Eve, your host, on a journey from trauma to sexual liberation. Join me and my guests as we dive into conversations around orgasm equality, self-love, body positivity, and essential sex education. Let's reclaim pleasure and close the orgasm gap, one empowering conversation at a time. Today I'm doing something a little different. I'm releasing an episode of the Shameless Care Podcast directly to my listeners, what's known as a feed drop, so the format will sound a lot different than usual. I wanted to share this episode because it covers an incredibly important topic, the history of HIV and AIDS, and where we are today in addressing this disease. This episode is sponsored by Shameless Care, a partner I trust in the safe sex and sexual health space. As the self-proclaimed face of safe sex, I fully support the work Shameless Care is doing to bring awareness to STI testing, including both its strengths and its limitations. The more we know, the more empowered we are to protect ourselves and make informed choices, which is essential for true consent. We're also getting very close to finding our winner of the ARIA giveaway, so now is the perfect time to join Patreon. For ad-free access to the full conversation, become a paid member to unlock the entire Kink series, plus exclusive photo sets featuring my Kink series guests. As a holiday bonus, I'm giving away ARIA Luxury Lubricant, a $50 value to the 10th person who joins my paid Patreon. For just $10, you'll get full access and a chance to win. So don't wait, sign up today and be part of the community. Want to ask a question for the Please Me podcast? Join the conversation on Patreon or subscribe to my Substack newsletter for exclusive content, behind-the-scenes updates, and a chance to have your questions featured on the show. Please Me is for mature audiences, so sit back, relax, and surrender to the pleasure of Please Me.
Welcome to the Shameless Care Podcast, where sex is normal, pleasure matters, and your search history finally feels like research. From science to the sheets, we break down the wild, hilarious, frustrating, and absolutely essential truths about sexual health. No shame, no judgment, no sugarcoating. And now here's your host, the guy who never set out to start a telemedicine company. He just got tired of doctors guessing and startups pretending to care. Here's Robert.
Welcome to the Shameless Care Podcast. Everyone, my name is Robert, and as always, I'm joined by the beautiful Anna.
Well, hello, everyone.
Now, I'm really excited about today's show because I think everyone is going to be fascinated by the story that is going to be told here today. We're going to talk about the history of HIV and AIDS.
It's really something that is very topical for you and I because this came out in the news when we were infants. And as you and I have grown up, we've learned so much about this. And it's gone from something that was something we didn't know much about to something that was killing many people to something that we can get under control and even get to undetectable levels now. It's a huge deal.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're excited to get to that. But first, I want to give you guys a little bit of just kind of interesting history before we get to on with the podcast, right, Anna?
Yeah, a little fun topical history. Absolutely.
I always like to go back and see what people actually thought at the time, because I feel like that is really, really fascinating. That's when you really learn about people. I am holding in my hands a physical pornography magazine, Anna. A lot of people have never even seen one of these before. A lot of our younger audience members. This is a Hustler magazine from 1988 that I bought on eBay specifically to learn about what people thought about AIDS at that time. People who consider themselves to be sex positive, I dare say. Right, Anna?
Yeah.
There are 2 articles in here that just blow me away. And the first one is called Beware Loopholes in AIDS Testing. And I'll just take a time out here to talk about that one, if I may.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, now I think everybody understands that HIV, that's actually what you test for. And if HIV is untreated long enough, it can become AIDS, essentially. And at that time, it pretty much always did. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, we didn't have the agents to stop it.
What's fascinating when you read this article is there are medical professionals debating on if HIV causes AIDS or not. And interestingly enough, if it always does, from the standpoint of like, yeah, you're going to go get HIV tested, but what difference does that make? Because that doesn't always cause AIDS. I just think it's so fascinating to go back in history and see what people thought back then. The other article is called Safe to Swing, Sex Swapping is Back and Better.
Again, clickbait of the day.
And there, this author interviewed people who owned swing clubs and swingers from all over the place back, again in 1988, or maybe he wrote this in 1987, something like that. The publishing date is September 1988 anyway. And he learned that in 1986 and 1987, that swinger club populations or attendance plummeted. But by 1988, reportedly, according to him, it was shooting back up as people became more comfortable with what the actual risks were and if they pertain to them individually or not in their opinion. I thought that was pretty interesting as well.
It was. And from what you were saying in the article, it was also the beginning of when condoms became really popular in those environments as well.
Yeah, that said that some people were starting to use condoms, which apparently they didn't do a lot of pre-HIV AIDS, and I thought that was interesting. The other thing that's really interesting is that a lot of people started using minoxidil 9, I think it's called, the spermicide. And some people, I guess, according to this article, felt like that stopped HIV and AIDS, which I find really interesting because this was published in 1988, and that was published as like a fairly understood thing, which blows me mind. Now, keep in mind, this is Hustler magazine. This isn't like the leading
it's not science.
Medical journal of the time. But you have to imagine this was pre-internet, obviously, and so people knew what they knew, basically, and they told other people about it.
Yeah, and that was the way people got a hold of their information if they were sex positive back then. There wasn't a ton of other sources for that.
Well, we have new listeners all the time, so I just want to let everybody know the format of the show. So right now we're doing what we call the introduction. We're getting ready to do the dirty joke of the week, where we just sort of break the ice with a dirty joke, right, Anna?
Mm-hmm.
Then we're going to do a foreplay segment where we give some topical news, sex news for the week. We do 2 of these shows a week, but we call it the Dirty Joke of the Week and Foreplay Segment of the Week. Don't ask me why. But then we have our main event, and that's where we're going to tell this complete story on the history of HIV and AIDS, which actually has a prominent role for Dr. Fauci from COVID fame, which, believe it or not, I mean, he must have been 80-something years old during COVID because he was 40 when this HIV and AIDS thing came around. And then we have our brief aftercare segment, and that's the show, right, Anna?
That's it. You got it.
All right. Well, with that in mind, let's go ahead and have our Dirty Joke of the Week.
Let's do it.
It's time to break the ice with the Shameless Care Dirty Joke of the Week.
Now, this is the part of the show where I tell a dirty joke, and the beautiful Anna judges it. And if she gives it a thumbs up, then we hear a... But if she gives it a thumbs down, then we hear a... All right, Anna, are you ready?
I'm ready.
I'm going to give you a warm-up one, okay? But you go ahead and judge this one just the same, okay?
All right,
but this is going to be a bonus joke.
Okay.
After his divorce, Mr. Jones realized that poker is not the only game that starts with holding hands and ends with a staggering financial loss. All right, maybe I needed a better warm-up joke. All right, here's the real joke, Anna. Are you ready?
I hope it's better than the first.
Ms. Parsons, the town Karen, called the sheriff at 1 o'clock in the morning to complain that 2 dogs were copulating on her front lawn. The sheriff suggested she throw cold water on them. Well, 10 minutes later, she called again to tell him that the water had not worked and that the dogs were still going at it. He told her to bang trash can lids together near the Randy canines. Well, 15 minutes later, she called yet again to complain that the noise had failed to work and that the dogs were copulating more vigorously than ever, Anna. Miss Parsons, the sheriff said slowly and deliberately, why don't you tell the dogs that they're wanted on the telephone? Will that stop them from copulating, she asked. Well, he said, it sure stopped me. All right, that was a slow thumbs up. I don't know.
I had to think about it, but I got there.
All right. Well, today's foreplay segment is good news. Are you ready to get to it, Anna?
I am.
Next up, foreplay. News about sex.
Well, Anna, at the time of this recording, this is only a few days old. I hold in my left hand a press release from the Food and Drug Administration.
Ooh.
It says FDA approves 2 oral therapies to treat gonorrhea. Now, what's really interesting about these is that both of them are from a brand new classification of antibiotics that gonorrhea has never seen before, right, Anna?
Yeah, this is really exciting because we did the whole super gonorrhea episode and learned a lot about how gonorrhea keeps burning through antibiotics.
Right. So a lot of people think that all STIs are kind of becoming resistant to everything. That's what people are really terrified about, and that's what they often think. But like syphilis, for example, is still very susceptible to the very first antibiotic used against it, which is penicillin from 1942 or 44, something like that.
Yeah.
Chlamydia has no resistance against doxycycline, which is still its first-line treatment, works pretty much every time. But gonorrhea is a different kind of bug where it just evolves really quickly. And I think this is now its 5th classification of antibiotics that it's on. To put it in perspective, it had only been a few years until it became resistant to penicillin, back in the day.
Oh, yeah, it did not last long.
The treatment that's used for it right now is a single intramuscular injection, which works really, really well. That's the CDC preferred treatment, still working very well. There have been a few cases around the world that have been resistant to that, but those cases have still been able to be cured. It's not like a panic situation right now. But this entire new classification of antibiotics that is now approved is something that gonorrhea has no susceptibility to at all right now. Now, I asked Anna to learn how to pronounce these drug names before the show, so let's see how she did. Go ahead, Anna.
Well, the 2 brand names are Nuzolvence and Blujepa. If you want the generic names, I can give you the bonus generic names as well, but we're trying not to, be as nerdy as we can be here.
No, that's okay. And I think it's fantastic that they're oral treatments because that intramuscular injection is quite a doozy for sure. Anna, are you ready for the main event?
I can't wait.
And now, the main event, the part you came for. Guest interviews, taboo topics, and real talk you won't hear in your doctor's office.
Well, Anna, over 40 years have passed since the first whispers of a mysterious deadly illness began circulating among doctors and the public.
In that time, we've gone from utter confusion and fear to a place of knowledge, effective treatment, and even prevention.
In today's episode, we delve into the complete history of the AIDS crisis, how it started, what experts first thought, and sometimes what they got wrong, how the public responded, and how far we've come. We'll highlight voices like Dr. Anthony Fauci, who witnessed the epidemic from day one, to emphasize just how little was known then compared to now.
This is a story of tragedy, scientific discovery, activism, and thank goodness, hope.
Absolutely. So, Anna, let's go back to when it first began, all right?
Let's do it.
It all began pretty quietly. On June 5th, 1981, an obscure medical report noted that 5 previously healthy young men in Los Angeles, all gay, had come down with a rare, severe pneumonia due to crippled immune systems.
A month later, another report described 26 similar cases in New York and San Francisco involving not only pneumonia, but unusual cancer, Kaposi's sarcoma.
These illnesses were extremely uncommon in young people with intact immunity, so doctors knew something very alarming was happening.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, then a 40-year-old infectious disease researcher at the National Institutes of Health, remembers reading those first reports while sitting in traffic. This is a quote, "I got chills up and down my spine," Fauci said. "Oh my God, this has to be a new disease."
As more cases surfaced, it became clear the immune system itself was being destroyed. By the end of 1981, 337 cases of this unexplained immune collapse had been reported in the United States, and tragically, 130 of those patients, nearly 40%, were already dead.
Young men and a few women and children were wasting away from infections their bodies could no longer fight.
At first, because many early cases were in gay men, some doctors labeled it GRID, gay-related immune deficiency.
But soon it was obvious this was not limited to one community. Cases appeared in heterosexual people, hemophiliacs who received blood transfusions, infants born to sick mothers, and people who injected drugs.
In mid-1982, the disease was officially named AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. Researchers began to suspect an infectious agent like a virus.
I kept going it over in my mind. We were dealing with a brand new infection, and it was likely a virus. And that's what Fauci recalled back in those early days.
In fact, his team assumed it might be a zoonotic virus, which jumps from animals to humans, which would later prove true. The virus originated from a chimpanzee virus in Africa. Well, that had to be absolutely terrifying for everyone, the general public, doctors. I mean, you can imagine how terrifying it would be, not even knowing how this spreads at that point and dealing with sick patients and then people losing loved ones so quickly. I think it would be interesting now, Anna, to talk about early misconceptions and the panic.
Let's do it. In those early years, experts were literally scrambling in the dark here. Many assumptions turned out to be wrong. Dr. Fauci admits that upon seeing the first cases that he scratched his head and thought it might be some drug people were taking that affected their immunity.
Some speculated nitrate poppers or other substances common in certain social circles could be causing the immune failure, a theory that proved incorrect as evidence mounted for an infectious cause. Early on, even the CDC's list of high-risk groups caused confusion. They noticed AIDS was striking homosexual men, heroin users, hemophiliacs, and Haitians, the so-called 4-H club.
The inclusion of Haitians was a red herring, likely because of early cases among Haitian immigrants. Scientists later realized being Haitian per se wasn't a cause, and that category was dropped in 1985 as it became clear the virus didn't care about nationality.
Now, the biggest misconception in the public was how AIDS spread. Was it airborne? Could you catch it from a toilet seat or a cough? In the absence of solid answers, fear and rumor ran wild.
But in 1983, researchers had strong epidemiological evidence that HIV spread through blood and sexual contact, not casual touch.
That September, the CDC released a bulletin identifying all major routes of transmission and explicitly ruling out spread by casual contact, food, water, air, or surfaces.
Despite this, myths persisted for years. Some newspapers in 1984 even raised the possibility that saliva might transmit AIDS, and it caused public alarm. It would take until 1986 for scientists to definitively prove that normal kissing or spit did not transmit HIV.
Another early false assumption was that only certain groups were at risk. That AIDS was a gay disease or limited to drug users was tragically wrong. As Surgeon General C. Everett Koop later wrote in 1988, people who have died of AIDS in the United States have been male and female, rich and poor, white, black, Hispanic, Asian, and American Indian.
Dr. Fauci also warned his colleagues early on. He quotes, "People thought I was nuts. They were asking me, why are you focusing on this disease of gay men only?" And he said, "This was not just going to stay with gay men. It's going to be a major, major problem."
He knew that because HIV spreads through universal behaviors like sex, it would soon appear in all populations, and sadly, he was right. Well, Anna, I think that is absolutely fascinating. I think we should now begin to talk about the HIV virus. When did they actually start to figure this out?
Well, scientists were desperate to find the cause of AIDS. And by 1983 and 84, they found it, and it was a virus. In May 1983, Dr. Francois Bar-Sinoussi and Luc Montagnier had a team in France that isolated a new retrovirus that was later named HIV from an AIDS patient's lymph node.
The following year, Dr. Robert Gallo in the United States confirmed the virus was the cause of AIDS. In April 1984, the United States Health Secretary Margaret Heckler held a famous press conference announcing the discovery of the virus, initially called HTLV-3, and optimistically declaring a vaccine might be ready in 2 years.
In hindsight, that optimism was definitely misplaced. No vaccine exists decades later, but at the time, this discovery was a huge breakthrough.
Now, with the virus identified as HIV, scientists raced to develop a blood test. By March of 1985, the first HIV antibody test was approved, and blood banks began screening donations.
This was crucial to stop transfusion-related infections. It also allowed public health officials to measure how many people were infected.
When those first test results came in, the news was chilling. Dr. Fauci said we were horrified. We had only been dealing with the tip of the iceberg. There were many-fold people who were infected and hadn't yet got clinically ill. In other words, hundreds of thousands of people were walking around with HIV with no symptoms, meaning the epidemic was far larger than the AIDS cases seen so far.
By 1986, the virus was officially named HIV, and it became clear that it had originated decades earlier in Central Africa. Cases were reported across Europe, Africa, Asia. It was a global phenomenon. The World Health Organization held its first meeting on AIDS in 1983 and launched the international surveillance.
Scientists also learned that HIV could lie dormant in the body for years. The typical time from HIV infection to developing full-blown AIDS was around 8 to 10 years in the absence of treatment. The long silent period meant many people in the late 70s and 1980s had acquired HIV, unknowingly spread it, and only later fell ill.
Well, Robert, let's talk about how this virus became deadly.
In the early years, an AIDS diagnosis was essentially a death sentence. The virus works by attacking the body's CD4 T cells, which are white blood cells crucial for immune defense.
Over time, HIV depletes these cells and cripples the immune system. Once CD4 counts fall low enough, the person becomes vulnerable to opportunistic infections, diseases that a healthy immune system would normally fight off. Pneumocystis pneumonia, Kaposi sarcoma cancers, and fungal infections of the brain, including things like severe tuberculosis, cytomegalovirus, and other infections would invade and ravage AIDS patients. Doctors were often helpless, only able to treat these infections temporarily.
Without any effective treatment for the virus itself, AIDS progressed rapidly. Many patients died within a year or two of diagnosis. Fauci said, "When I began seeing AIDS patients, most survived 8 to 15 months. One dramatic example was the rapper Eazy-E. He was diagnosed with AIDS in early 1995 and died just 1 month later at the age of 30.
Stories like that were common, especially in the early 1980s. By the time someone was diagnosed, their immune system was already devastated. Family, friends, and entire communities witnessed young people wasting away in a matter of months.
In 1984, AIDS was dubbed the 100% killer. Virtually nobody survived it long term. Hospitals were filled with patients whom staff sometimes feared to touch, and you can imagine that's true, Anne. I mean, early on, some healthcare workers worried about casual transmission until better guidelines came along.
That's right, Robert. Fear kind of took over before knowledge really set hold. Meanwhile, funerals became tragically routine in affected communities. From 1981 to 1987, the number of annual AIDS deaths soared in the U.S. every year. By 1994, AIDS had become the leading cause of death for Americans aged 25 to 44, which is a shocking statistic for a disease only recognized a decade earlier.
All right, Anna, let's go ahead and talk about the government response and public awareness, because there's the medical side of this, and then there's the upside, right? What took place to get us where we are today, too slowly, but surely.
Well, like you were saying, the first few years of the crisis, the U.S. government was startlingly silent. President Ronald Reagan, who was in the office from 1981 to 1989, famously did not even say the word AIDS in public until 1985. By that time, thousands had already died.
There was a perception in some political circles that this was a disease of others, like gay men, drug users, which sadly delayed a robust federal response. Under pressure, Reagan finally tasked Surgeon General C. Everett Koop to write a comprehensive report. Dr. Koop, who was a conservative Christian doctor, surprised many by becoming a champion of straight talk on AIDS.
In October 1986, he released the Surgeon General's report on AIDS, which for the first time from a high government office made it clear that HIV cannot be spread casually and called for frank sex education.
Koop did not mince words. He believed public health was paramount. As he put it, Americans, especially young people, must not die because they were deprived of explicit information about how HIV was transmitted.
Perhaps Koop's most influential move was in 1988 when he launched the largest public health mailing in U.S. history, Robert. On May 26, 1988, the U.S. government mailed an 8-page brochure titled Understanding AIDS to every American household, over 107 million homes. Isn't that crazy?
It is, and I've read every word of that. It's available online, and it is amazing, and it does not mince words about exactly how AIDS spreads, and it's 100% factual, even by today's standards. It's fantastic. And it's absolutely amazing. It went to 107 million homes. It went to every single household at that time in the United States, and it used words like anal sex, which is just amazing.
It is. Public education efforts like this, along with increasing media coverage, did begin to change behavior finally. In the late 1980s, awareness of AIDS grew, and surveys found many Americans adjusted their sexual practices.
Condom use, for instance, climbed significantly. One analysis of drugstore sales showed that condom sales in the United States jumped from about 240 million in 1986 to 299 million in 1988, which is a 25% surge.
That's impressive.
This was directly linked to AIDS education and publicity. People were heeding messages about safe sex.
By 1987, the CDC had launched its first nationwide AIDS public service ads under the slogan, America Responds to AIDS, encouraging condom use and compassion for those infected.
Now, at the same time, the social impact of AIDS was really profound. Fear and stigma were rampant. People with AIDS were often ostracized, fired from jobs, or denied services.
Heartbreaking stories hit the news, like that of Ryan White, a hemophiliac teenager who contracted HIV from tainted blood and was barred from attending his middle school in 1985. Ryan White's fight against discrimination helped humanize AIDS for many Americans.
And when celebrities were touched by AIDS, the public took notice. The death of movie star Rock Hudson in 1985 marked a real turning point. Suddenly, AIDS had a famous face.
It forced the public to realize that if it can affect a Hollywood leading man, it can affect anyone. In 1991, basketball legend Magic Johnson announced that he was HIV positive, shattering the myth that only gay men get HIV and further raising awareness in the heterosexual community.
I absolutely remember that. I remember asking my mom what condoms were at that time when the whole Magic Johnson thing came out, and she told me to ask my dad.
Typical.
Yeah. No responsibility. Just shuttle it on to the next person.
There was tremendous community activism that helped accelerate a lot of the government action. There was a group called ACT UP, and that stands for AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, and that was in 1987. And because of a lot of their actions, they really kept pushing policies along. And finally, Congress passed the first significant AIDS funding bill in 1988.
And hired a AIDS czar in 1988 as well. And that era closed with the first World's AIDS Day on December 1st, 1988, a sign that the world was uniting to combat the disease. Anna, let's go ahead and talk about the height of the epidemic in the 1990s.
Well, Robert, by the early 1990s, the AIDS crisis was at its peak toll in many parts of the world. In the United States, epidemiologists later estimated that the new HIV infections reached a peak of about 130,400 per year in 1984 and 1985.
Throughout the late 1980s, roughly 50 to 60,000 Americans were becoming infected with HIV each year. And of course, deaths lagged a few years behind infections. They continued to rise into the early 1990s as those infected in the 1980s succumbed to AIDS.
1995 was the deadliest year in the U.S. Over 50,000 Americans died of AIDS that year. And AIDS was the leading cause of death, like we said earlier, for adults 25 to 44 years old.
By then, 500,000 AIDS cases had been reported in the United States since the start, and around 300,000 Americans had died. Anna, let's go ahead and talk about this situation globally, which was even worse.
The HIV epidemic exploded in sub-Saharan Africa in the late 1980s and 1990s. By 1994, AIDS was ravaging countries like Uganda, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and others, drastically lowering life expectancies.
Now, this number blows me away, Anna. Worldwide, new HIV infections peaked around 1996 at an estimated 3.4 million cases per year.
That's unbelievable, Robert.
If you've ever wished sex could feel more connected, more intense, or honestly just more fun, you need to check out Shameless Care. They're a telemedicine company built entirely around sexual health, real doctors, real prescriptions, and products that actually work. Like Shameless Chemistry, their oxytocin plus tadalafil blend that deepens connection and boosts arousal. Or Shamelessly Aroused, a topical cream with the active ingredient found in men's ED medication, increasing blood flow exactly where it counts. Every order includes a short video introduction from your doctor, transparent pricing, and no subscriptions ever. Just real, sex-positive healthcare that delivers results. Because you're a Please Me listener, you can use coupon code PLEASEME for $15 off your order of any product on the Shameless Care website. Use the code PLEASEME, that's PLEASEME, at checkout to claim your $15 off. Again, that's shamelesscare.com, code PLEASEME. Because great sex shouldn't be complicated. It should be shameless. This episode is sponsored by Shameless Care.
Anna, I think that is enough bad news. I think people get it. This was an extremely earth-shatteringly serious and deadly situation. Let's go ahead and get to some better news. What do you say?
For the first decade of the epidemic, there was no effective treatment for HIV itself. Doctors could only offer medications to treat specific infections, but nothing to stop the virus itself.
So things like antibiotics for pneumonia and that sort of thing. And that changed in March of 1987 when the FDA approved AZT, the first antiretroviral medication for AIDS.
AZT had initially been developed to fight cancer, but it showed some ability to inhibit HIV replication. This was not a miracle cure. It was actually far from it.
AZT was extremely high dose, burdening patients with pills every 4 hours around the clock, and caused severe side effects like anemia.
Over time, HIV also developed resistance to AZT when used alone. But AZT was proof that antiretroviral therapy was possible and could prolong the lives of some patients.
For many desperately ill in 1987, AZT offered a few extra months or years of life, buying time until better drugs could be found.
Through the late 1980s and early 1990s, a few other antiretroviral drugs were introduced, like DDL, DTC, and D4T. But these were also used one at a time and had limited success.
HIV would almost always mutate and become resistant to single drugs. Researchers likened it to squeezing a balloon. You push the virus in one spot and it bulges out in the other. The real revolution arrived in 1995 and 1996 with a new class of drugs, protease inhibitors.
In 1995, the FDA approved saquinavir, the first protease inhibitor, which ushered in a new era of powerful combination therapy. Scientists discovered that by hitting HIV at multiple points in its life cycle simultaneously, they could suppress it much more effectively. This approach was dubbed HAART, or HAART, standing for High Active Antiretroviral Therapy, which was essentially a cocktail of 3 or more drugs used together.
Now, at the July 1996 International AIDS Conference in Vancouver, researchers announced that HAART could reduce HIV in a patient's blood to undetectable levels and dramatically restore immune function.
It was like a light switch flipped. Within a year, AIDS wards in wealthy countries began emptying out as patients who had been on death's door rose from their beds.
This was sometimes called the Lazarus effect, and you just have to stop for a second and really fully appreciate this breakthrough. In 1997, for the first time since the epidemic began, the United States saw a huge drop in AIDS deaths, a 47% decline compared to the year before.
Which is such good news. HIV/AIDS transformed from an acute fatal illness to a manageable chronic condition.
As Dr. Fauci described, today's newly diagnosed 20-year-old patient, if he or she follows the science, can expect to live for 50 years or more.
Considering that in the 1980s, survival after the AIDS diagnosis was often under 2 years, it was one of the most transforming advances in the history of medicine.
The drug regimen in the late 90s could be burdensome. Dozens of pills a day, strict schedules, and side effects like nausea, diarrhea, fat redistribution, but it kept people alive.
Over the 2000s, treatment got better and easier. New classes of drugs were introduced.
Pharmaceutical companies had eventually combined multiple drugs into single pills, greatly simplifying therapy. Today, in 2025, many patients take just one pill a day or receive long-acting injections with minimal side effects. If they stay on the treatment, the amount of virus in their blood can be suppressed so low that it's undetectable and even untransmittable to others. A concept known as U equals U, undetectable equals untransmittable. Anna, I think just before we move on to where we are today, let's just recap some of these numbers from the peak to today, because I think it really helps to fully appreciate the medical breakthroughs that we've seen.
Well, the numbers are staggering, Robert. I'll just give two very short ones. At the peak of this crisis, 130,000 Americans were getting HIV each year, and 50,000 people were dying in the mid-90s per year. That has decreased dramatically since then, and globally, the yearly death toll declined from 2 million in 2004 to 600,000 in 2024. So in 20 years, it's a huge difference. It's a huge decline.
And of course, now when we did a podcast on the history of PrEP, basically what medical professionals have done and drug companies and the United States government is taken those HIV treatments that make the virus undetectable and untransmittable and put it into a format which prevents you from getting HIV in the first place. And that's known as PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, right, Anna?
That's right. And it's really exciting.
It is exciting. It's now a generic, and we talk about it probably often enough that people who listen to the show have heard about it. But if not, I think it begs the question really, okay, why are people still getting HIV today then, Anna? What's going on there?
The answer comes down to gaps in awareness, access, and behavior. Not everyone who could benefit from PrEP is using it.
In fact, the CDC estimates that only about 36% of Americans who need PrEP were actually on it in 2022. Many people at risk either don't know about PrEP, don't have access to a provider or insurance to get it, or face social barriers.
There are stark racial disparities. Among those who can benefit, an astonishing 94% of white Americans were prescribed PrEP, but only 24% of Latinos and 13% of Black Americans were accessing it in 2022.
This despite Black and Latino communities having higher infection rates. The reasons vary, like unequal healthcare access, fewer providers offering PrEP in some areas, mistrust of the medical system, which we talk a lot about on this podcast, and stigma around HIV or sexuality.
One striking example is that surveys found about 1 in 3 primary care doctors in the U.S. had not even heard of PrEP a few years ago. And if doctors don't bring it up, patients, like we've talked about before, tend to not want to bring that kind of stuff up to their doctors.
I'm skeptical that would still be true today, Anna. I don't know, but it's hard for me to imagine a doctor not knowing about PrEP in these days and age.
Another thing to remember is that PrEP requires consistent use. So if there's any kind of challenge in your life, homelessness, poverty, those types of things, and getting access to this drug, if you're not taking it consistently, it's not effective. So that is another barrier to getting this into the population.
Well said, Anna. Are you ready for some aftercare?
I am.
It's time to wrap things up with aftercare, because thoughtful conversations deserve thoughtful endings.
You know, Anna, we live in a time when people always think that things are getting much, much, much worse. I'm not getting political here, but I have millennial friends who refuse to have kids because of global warming, for example, and things like that. And I think this is just one of those opportunities to look back at history and think, my God, how far have we come in just a couple of decades?
Absolutely. I mean, I still can't believe that 2004 was the peak death rate. That was only, 20, almost 22 years ago. And here we are in a much better place and state because of science and advancement.
Right. And I have a family member with HIV. I'm sure a lot of you do as well. I still hear of these things all the time. I've not had a family member that's died of AIDS that I know of, but people talk to me about this all the time. A couple of years ago at Naughty New Orleans, the swinger lifestyle event in New Orleans, I was just at the bar having a drink. Anna wasn't there, so I was sad and lonely. And I'm talking to a couple that's sitting there, and I have no idea if they were there at the convention or not. This was a bar just on Bourbon Street or somewhere like that. And he asked what I do, and, he was not a young man. I would say maybe 60, something like that. And I started talking to him about it, and he immediately tells me about him losing his brother to AIDS in the 1980s, and he started to cry. This is something that is still very, very real to so many people.
Scarring events like these leave a mark, and it's permanent in people's lives. But it's one of those things where there's hope that in the future, this won't be something that leaves a lasting impact.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, everybody, and we will be back in a few days.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone who might find it helpful. See you next time.
If you're feeling disconnected from your body, struggling with intimacy, or facing a sexual health condition, you're not alone. There is no shame in what you're experiencing, and you don't have to figure it out on your own. But the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to reclaim your confidence, pleasure, and connection. That's why I offer a free 15-minute discovery call to explore what's going on and whether working together is the right next step. Spots fill quickly, so don't wait. The link is in the show notes. Grab your time now. I want to personally invite you to join me on Patreon for ad-free listening, bonus episodes, and early releases. Already there is a lot of bonus content on there with many webinars that I've done in the past and a show that I've never released to the public before. My show is completely self-funded, and when you are able to support me in this way, I'm able to spread my message of body positivity, self-love, and women's empowerment, and empowerment in general around sexuality around the globe. And so with that being said, I appreciate everyone who has already joined Patreon, and if you've thought about joining, now's your nudge to do so. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.